All right, hello. I sorry for anyone that was just waiting for a moment. I realized I unplugged my mic that I use for Twitch. Like obviously people on TikTok can hear me either way, but I've had some weird shit happening with my Bluetooth lately. I don't really know what the fuck's going on, but I'm in an apartment complex, so you never really fucking know who could be tapping into your Bluetooth. Spoiler alert. Anyway, I am here on a very impromptu stream to read the very first chapter of the memoir that I completed over the course of the last week. It's now officially for sale on Amazon. It's called I Have Been the Bad Guy: Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Age or Environment. I use the words interchangeably because, as anyone who studies technology or is alive right now knows, the algorithmic age, ever since COVID started, has been influenced by COVID existing and changing everything about the way that we exist in the world. So basically, I call the environment plus COVID the environment. Because as any autist does, I love a good pun. And any media ecologist, I suppose. So thanks for anyone coming in. If you could please do me a solid and share the live. This I've been working on. So basically, I've been mentally preparing to write this memoir my entire life. Just to start there. And I'm going to read today the intro and the first chapter. Okay. It literally published this morning. My author copy isn't going to show up until like more than a week from today. And you all can technically buy it for like typical price, which is, people on TikTok can't see it, but it's on Amazon right now. If you go to my Twitch, you'll be able to see the full screen as always. And if someone on Twitch could actually let me know, I see somebody's here. If you could let me know if my sound is okay, that would mean a lot to me because I just plugged this mic in when I was on stream and I don't know if it's actually like picking up sound now that I think about it. So if someone could also do me a solid and tell me if that sound is fine. Yeah, thank you, Leo. I know that the sound on TikTok is good, but on Twitch, how's it going? Gray Soul. Okay, so can you hear me? I imagine you can. Whenever this is lit up, I know that Twitch should be able to hear me, but just okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate you. Okay, excellent. Yay. Okay, so we're full steam ahead. So like I said, I'm going to be reading the first chapter of my memoir. I've been talking about this for as long like basically I've been talking about writing a book since forever, but really especially since finishing my dissertation. How's it going, Harley? And this is what I've done. Okay, basically my last week, every single waking moment has been consumed with making this what it is now. And so I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you resonate with it. It's not an easy read. I'm going to be honest with you right now. But that's what makes it important, right? So anyway, like I said, if you could give me a share, give me likes and shit so we can boost the algorithm. I really want as many people as possible to read this because I am risking everything in publishing this, and I need to be very clear with that. But I know that it's worth it. I'm doing it because I know it's worth it for all of us, okay? So anyway, I have acknowledgments at the beginning. One more time, it's called I Have Been the Bad Guy: Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Age. I have a little write-up that I think I'll actually zoom in. Oh, and actually, that reminds me. I gotta start the captions. As usual, on my Twitch also, I have captions that populate in real time when I remember to put them on. And so if you could either benefit from or need those, definitely take advantage of them on my Twitch. But this is the little write-up of it. I'll move TikTok just for right now so you can see it as I'm reading it, at least somewhat. The text is probably small anyway. But my write-up for the book goes like this. Have you ever been made to feel like the bad guy? Dr. Bird has too. In this brief memoir, they reveal secrets about their life that they have kept hidden for over 30 years regarding compulsory heterosexuality, repressed unexplored queernesses, and the latent life realization that turns out they're actually they're hashtag actually autistic. Retold from their 33-year-old Dr. Bird's eye view, these extensively brave disclosures add one whole lifetime of flesh onto the US body politic. This timely manuscript illuminates, historicizes, and contextualizes the fucking fact that autism is not just a trend taking off on TikTok recently, but that there are massive neuroqueer self-realizations happening worldwide in the algorithmic environment. Environment plus virus equals environment. Dr. Bird's unmasked writing voice puts the cut the shit into slice of life, providing deep and raw disclosures of lifelong confusion, gaslighting, and struggles with family dysfunction, friendship loss, vulnerability, intimacy, sexual violence, and substance abuse. After extensive sharing, it's time to grieve. They usher in a eulogy for their lifetimes that once were by diagnosing how foundational US ideas did and continue to dehumanize, sicken, disable, and deaden us. Then they preach to the global choir about the single most connected time in history. Dr. Bird has a lot more puns and trauma than answers, but in the end recommends some liberatory antibodies and moving forward far less miserably. So that's the little write-up. I read everyone's whenever I read books. You can already tell I'm like literally, so this means everything to me. Like I can't express to you. I have hyperempathy as an autist. I have my whole life. I blush like this and I make reference to it in the book. This is me bearing my actual soul to everyone all over the entire world. So thank you for being here. Oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense that the sound is probably better on TikTok than yeah. There might be something weird going on with my mic because I just plugged it in on Twitch. But anyway, without further ado, I have acknowledgments at the beginning. Let me turn Twitch so that you can, or TikTok so that you can see me again. Okay, so the acknowledgments are short and simple. It's 2 sentences. I say, for every direct speaking, substance abusing, violated autist of a family who didn't understand. Thank you for surviving to this day and for who you have been every day. We deserve and deserved better. So this is the introduction. Most everything you are about to read, I have hidden about myself from the world for 30 years. No one is going to believe you, Dr. Bird. No one is about to trust what you have to say about your own life. What I'm about to tell you are my experiences of having lived my entire life in my own body. The ways how, from living my life in my own body, I only knew what I knew, everything became normal in repetition, and how I realized everything was connected. Throughout this memoir, I write in my unmasked, natural speaking style. If you don't like that, you are welcome to read someone else's memoir. This one is mine, so take my voice or leave it. Thank you for that. I like that. That was a very timely follow. Thanks for the follow, Moonhilda. So with that said, consider this introduction a broad-reaching trigger warning for discriminations, abuse, and sexual violences because my having hid these parts of myself did not protect me from them. I am well aware, as someone who was told by my therapist not to seek a professional diagnosis because it would hurt me more than it would help me. Also, thank you so much for that, hearts. I'm not going to be able to look over to Twitch or to anything while I'm reading this very much, but I saw that and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let me restart that sentence. I am well aware, as someone who was told by my therapist not to seek a professional diagnosis because it would hurt me more than it would help me, that sharing these parts of myself that I have kept hidden put me in real danger of being hated and or further systematically discriminated against, or systemically. There's a difference between those things. Things I very deliberately use systemically, against for the entire rest of my life, especially as I write this in the US eugenics context that has emerged since COVID-19 started and because of the fascism that has returned. I am accepting the risks I take in deciding to share this memoir-style version of my life for 2 reasons. 1, to revisit my life and accept myself for the strong, imperfect, and vulnerable human I know myself to be, as well as 2, for anyone and everyone who disclosed to me that they believe reading my book will help them in whatever capacity that may be because of my TikToks. This is not and could never be the exhaustive retelling of my life. It is, however, main memories retold about my life as I remember living. I have chosen to include no names besides my own. I let the actions of others speak for themselves in relation with my own. I have not been a perfect person. Insert that one Hoobastank song. But seriously, most people who lived in my immediate vicinity will probably not believe most, if not all, of what I'm about to disclose herein because of the way that they perceived me as life happened, and the sheer gravity of it all. So let me make one thing clear before I proceed. If you don't believe me, it doesn't matter. I couldn't care less. Since you haven't lived my life in my body, you're not an authority on describing my neurotype. Even if readers gain nothing else from reading this retelling, I guess I have a typo, retelling of my life, or retelling me of my life. I actually kind of like that typo. They should be able to still walk away with a better understanding of why my boundaries are now so strong. I block so swiftly on social media and refuse to conform to certain social norms if and when they demand me to sacrifice my own authenticity. Also, thank you for that follow on Twitch. At the absolute minimum, readers will walk away with a better understanding of how and why there are ongoing massive neuroqueer self-realizations happening that have exploded in algorithmic spaces like TikTok, especially post March 2020. I mentioned that in this work because my dissertation was about sociosexual ecologies in the algorithmic age, and halfway through writing that, COVID-19 hit. That and the fact I'm a late in life realized autistic person myself are the reasons one of the major findings of my project was the neuroqueer self-realizations in the algorithmic age on platforms like TikTok. If neither of those things happened, I would be as painfully unaware and suppressed as I was during my PhD. And as you'll see, there's a chance that I wouldn't be alive to say anything if the pandemic hadn't happened. My experience does not and could never represent all neuroqueer autists, a word I use to describe myself, that non-autists aren't welcome to use, and not all autistic people resonate with or choose to identify with, and I respect that, or all late in life realized autists, as in, not everyone likes the word autist. Our community is not a hive mind. Many of us, however, have exchanged solidarity regarding many similarities during the most connected time in human history, and it has changed the entire course of our lives. For more of my life than not, I have been the bad guy, and I didn't have to be this way. I've chosen to organize this book into 3 parts: Little Bird, Burned Out, and Dr. Bird. Included at a key point in each chapter is one of my poems that speak to a theme of that point in my life. As such, the first 2 chapters especially recount oppressive norms, as well as many survived instances of sexual violence, social struggles, and substance abuse, revisited as totally normal events of my life, because as an unrecognized autist, these are normal occurrences. For these reasons and more within these chapters, I have chosen to warn readers with 3 red exclamation points, and really, I have content warnings right before as well. So it's like there's 3 exclamation points on either side, and I say the following passage includes content that is blah, blah, blah. Right before any passages in which I explicitly detail systemic violences so they can make a decision. Whenever you reach those points in any chapter, if you are not in the mental space to read any specified content, instead, please either 1, pause and take time for yourself instead of doing so, and or 2, know that I have anticipated this and installed a measure to accommodate anyone who cannot or should not read accounts of these natures. For such readers, I have installed a system throughout using symbols, meaning right after any passage with graphic violence mentioned, I have indicated that the particularly violent details are over by placing 7 rows of yellow stars. Then, as the chapter resumes after those yellow symbols, I've done my best to describe basic relevant info, still allowing readers to comprehend as close to the full context of what happened as possible. I know there is no way to create a safe space for anyone in a world as inequitable and violent as this. My hope is by implementing these measures, it will reduce harm while sharing my story as an oppressive participant in and or a survivor of various systemic violences normalized in the US. Within Chapter 1, I define neuroqueer as coined by Dr. Nick Walker in her work, followed by introducing readers to secrets of my childhood and teenage years, recounting behaviors and habits that, as I was raised, both my family and passing friends implicitly and explicitly taught me to keep to myself or eliminate. To them, I appeared to be awkward, selfish, and often aggravated child who had outbursts at seemingly tiny things. I was seen as having a short fuse, who was acting ungrateful for what I had. This led others to cast me as the bad guy. In other words, for being autistic, I was both disciplined and bullied for existing as my whole self. This abusive treatment catalyzed me to undergo extreme forms of full body-mind micromanagement. This was the point in my life where I learned that my personality, feelings, emotions, and needs were not only not desirable to accept by loved ones, but were also too much for alleged friends. I quickly learned that to make myself tolerable to others, I needed to cater to and follow their lead. Near the end, I explain how as a teen, I met a friend who made racist jokes, and since I learned to mimic others to survive, I then took part in casual racisms framed as jokes, revealing a lesser spoken about cycle of violence due to matrices of domination, Patricia Hill Collins' term for the way interrelated domains organize societal power relations. I believe this awful normal disclosure will add to existing knowledge about autistic racisms, nuancing what is known by Black ethnic studies, whiteness studies scholars, among others. I end by differentiating between being the bad guy, italicized, and choosing to become the bad guy instead. That distinction sets a stage for understanding the rest of my pre-30-year-old life. Within Chapter 2, I take readers through a temporal autopsy of my flesh wounds that further explicate what I have called the sexually violent U.S. ecology, that exemplifies many common ways that, as is extensively documented in research studies from the last 15 years, autists are at risk for significantly higher rates of being pervasively discriminated. Oh, yeah, it's another typo I got. I'm going to catch all my typos when I'm reading this. Pervasively discriminated against for existing both inside and outside of work, substance abuse, sexual violence, self-harm, and suicidality than non-autistics. With that said, this was the hardest chapter to write and will be the hardest chapter to read by far. I would recommend you do not read the entire chapter in one sitting. It may be too much to hold. The same reason it was hard to read and write is because these violences are so pervasively normal. We're only at the beginning of lost generations of autists coming forward who have survived these often interplaying harms, and my hope is that disclosing my own will add to recent realizations. This chapter is best to be read and understood in tandem with my requirement politics article, which is also coming out in like a couple days, but there's a free copy also on my academia page. In Chapter 3, after a brief discussion of my experience of therapy and therapists' reaction to me throughout my life, the first section is all about when I thought I could work and drink it all away. Then I talk readers through my early to mid-20s, and an autistic script I have often repeated when people ask me how I stumbled, luckily, into my communication master's program with an extended part I always leave out about the time at the end where I was attacked by pure evil. After surviving my quick brush with death and Robin Williams died, RIP, I explain how the mentors at this point in my life helped me rebuild my self-esteem and sense of identity from the ground up at the age of 23. As becomes clear, even with a handful of cool people supporting me throughout that process, it was still rough and thus not entirely pretty or flattering due to my unknown alexithymia, substance abuse to cope with social overstimulation, and interoception issues. I then describe a particular point at which, due to autistic burnout, spelled like the beginning of my first name, bad old compulsory heterosexuality, and confusion, I mistook loving the way someone loved me for loving them back, which slipped me back into being the bad guy territory, as in italicized. This was followed by a fuller, more abrupt series of events, or anamorph, if other 90 babies will, for being seen as the bad guy, italicized, this is going to happen a lot, into instead choosing to live as the bad guy. I also uncovered some ways my life, or my shift was complicated because obviously living categories of self are never as cut and dry as words make them seem. Readers may notice final two chapters are significantly shorter than the first three because that's just how it went down. For anyone who may have looked at that page count of chapter 4 and thought, what are you talking about? It looks like chapter 4 is pretty fucking long. First, I respect that. Also, it's only long because it includes a fuck ton of screenshots of emails, which I mostly had to delete for the Kindle version, or for the hard copy version, by the way, but they're in the Kindle version, and tweets from 2020. The vast majority of what is long about the chapter is due to the space they comprise. For the fullest picture, readers should also read my 3 columns that I wrote to the BGSU newspaper about around that time. Number 1, 6 questions for BGSU community consideration. Number 2, higher education attacks and silence. And number 3, lifting mask mandates is irresponsible. I end this chapter by discussing my own grieving and self-realization process in the embarrassment. Then, after 33 years, it's fucking closing time. Unlike a good bar DJ paid to signal closure with that one overplayed song at most bars, I close my memoir about these first 33 years of my life by challenging readers to think about the vast implications of our well-documented loneliness and touch hunger epidemic, the sex apocalypse, and the implications of the fucking fact that mass self-realizations are happening on platforms in the ongoing systemically denied environment. Although some readers may be drunk on long COVID-19 denialism, you'll want to read this. So this is part 1. So we're just going to read, that was the whole intro. I tried to make it as short as I could. The funny part about writing this is like, when I'm used to writing inside of a Word document. So the Word document itself in like a regular 8.5 by 11 was like 111 pages, but then it turns out, like, I don't know, I didn't think it through. I was like, I'm gonna make this, under 200 pages for sure. And then, when you shrink it down, it becomes over 200 pages, just over. But it was only like 3 pages long in a Word document, and now it's like, I don't know, like 8 or something. Anyway, chapter 1 is called Who Am I? The Bad Guy. My name is Dr. Bernadette Bird Bowen. My mom named me after St. Bernadette because she was volunteering at a church nearby and saw a poster with a church by the same name on it. She always said if she ever had another girl, she'd name them Bernadette. That, the holiness, maturity, and professionalism of my first name never sat right with me, so I mainly go by Bird. I was born with multiple hernias that had to be removed and were also hardly ever spoken of again. I was assigned female at birth in the United States, and therefore I was assigned to be ashamed of my body and myself from the day I was born. I'm a millennial, and I am not a woman. I am a non-binary NB neuroqueer person. Dr. Nick Walker first in her 2008 essay coining the term, as well as in her book Neuroqueer Heresies and on her website, defines neuroqueer as both a verb, neuroqueering as the practice of queering, subverting, defying, disrupting, liberating oneself from neuronormativity and heteronormativity simultaneously, and that can also be an adjective, serving as a label of social identity. One can neuroqueer and one can be neuroqueer. A neuroqueer individual is any individual whose identity, selfhood, gender performance, and/or neurocognitive style have in some way been shaped by their engagement in practices of neuroqueering, regardless of what gender, sexual orientation, or style of neurocognitive functioning they may have been born with. Long before I knew what autism is or was, or had the language to know I'm a neuroqueer NB, for most of my life I was mistaken for someone else. And then there's a poem that I wrote, it's called Yellow. After a week of this world, I turned yellow. My liver's formal proclamation, your breast milk is no good here. I do not nourish like the rest of you. If you try to force me, my filters malfunction. We are not compatible devices. Stop trying to fit us together. Let me be. Shortly after I was born, my mom's attempting to breastfeed me gave me jaundice. Luckily, my mom's favorite color was yellow. Maybe that's why she called me Little Bird. She also said I had a very hard time letting go of my pacifier as a toddler. My mom used to tell me I'd make a good lawyer because I love to and am good at arguing. In my early life, I was very confident in my ability to share information and help people. Turns out many parents do not like to or don't believe they have anything to learn from a child. Like my mom always wanted me to wear dresses, and I hated dresses. The one picture she always kept on her dresser was of a little me, probably about 6 or 7 years old, in a dress she picked out with plastic beaded jewelry on. It was like she'd frozen in time a femininity. I don't know why I have trouble saying that word. Femininity clad version of me because that's how she preferred me. My older sister played that role for her. She played Barbies, did dance, and countless musicals. If I had Barbies, I cut off their hair and made them have sex. Once I learned that cleaning gave me praise, my version of playing with toys was lining up all my stuffed animals and admiring them. But once we went on vacation to Arkansas and saw a cave, and I collected rocks for many years. To others, my mom bragged that as a kid, while riding in the back seat of her car, before I knew cardinal directions or street names, I used to be able to tell her where we were on drives from only seeing the tops of the trees. Maps, eat your heart out. She'd also bragged that I was psychic because once I said, Auntie is about to call, and then the phone rang, and it was actually her. I am and have always been a very loud, goofy laugher. My emotional expressions are raw, but for the most part, I never liked to be touched. It's always been too much and still is. Instead, I have many fond memories of time spent in my parents' tub, making as many Avon bubbles as possible, spinning around in circles like a whirlpool, or reenacting both sides of a fictional dramatic scene, sometimes even bringing myself to literal hysterical tears. I remember my mom standing outside the bathroom door a couple of times asking me, "Are you okay in there, little bird?" When I was young, I realized my imagination would carry me away and it had to be my secret. I know Avon was top tier. Like I feel like the smell of the specific Avon bubble bath is just seared into my state of being for the rest of my life. um when I was young, I realized my imagination would carry me away and it had to be my secret. Any part of it that slipped out of my mouth, which it often did when I was alone, I had to keep quiet in others' presence. When I wanted to make noise to myself, I had to immediately stop. My parents would look at me and I knew they disapproved. They wanted me to be seen but not heard. Other ways I stood my ground. I asked them why, and if a reason didn't make sense, I said so. Like one time a new family moved in next door. Their dad was on the Chicago Bears in the 80s. They were an interracial family, and one day, shortly after they moved in, I heard my parents racially gossiping about them in our kitchen. I was just a kid, but I didn't like what I was hearing. It didn't make sense what they were saying, so I grabbed a double popsicle from our freezer, walked outside, handed the other half to my new neighbor, and introduced myself. We spent a lot of days playing Bomberman 64 in her basement or watching the best of Will Ferrell repeatedly. As a millennial, I was a child in the 90s and 2000s. That means I was raised on the golden years of Nickelodeon. As a kid, I could tell you the entire Rugrats episode, scene by scene, from just seeing the very first image of the show pop up after the title would be displayed. And I did tell my mom. I would run over to her and I would repeat back a scene Angelica was just in, as verbatim as I could, and I was convinced she would be happy. She acted happy for me, and that worked for a while, but eventually I learned she was faking it. But not before, as my mom eventually told us a story. I got in trouble for repeating an Angelica line back to the wrong pre K teacher during reading time because I was bored, and I told her so using Angelica's language. Sorry, I'm reading, so I won't be accepting any invites. After hearing my mom tell others a few too many stories about me, I learned I couldn't trust her. Throughout my life, I knew I projected my early lack of trust in her in ways I didn't yet understand. At home, when I wasn't watching the best years of the Sci Fi Channel with eyes, not wise, that's an important distinction. Sitcoms, Nickelodeon are the same movies: Dancing Princesses, Neverending Story, Princess Bride, The Mask, Snow White, Only on Halloween, Beetlejuice, Hocus Pocus, one specific Donald Duck VHS. I was binging some of the only foods that I would eat throughout almost my entire childhood: cocoa powder, pumpkin seeds, beef jerky and beef stick, french fries, popsicles, fruits, like an entire bag of oranges or something randomly, raw vegetables, and candy. When people weren't looking, I'd also sometimes eat weird shit. Like more than a few times, I absent-mindedly ate the package the pumpkin seeds came in that were made of plastic and red paint. And when I say that I ate only these foods, I mean I really ate those things. Like I ate the fuck out of those foods. My boomer parents tried everything that they could to get me to eat other foods like meat and dairy. Once they even went so far as to try and force me to sit at the kitchen table for hours, thinking that it would get me to eat canned green beans. Little did they know, the longer those green beans sat out there in the little ceramic dish, they only got colder and less appetizing, strengthening my resolve. Needless to say, I didn't eat those green beans and autonomously chose to go to bed hungry. If I didn't have food to eat, I always had my nails to bite anyway. I don't mean in a small way. I mean, when I was young, I would bite my nails so severely that I've made every single finger bleed. And I'd also bite the cuticles around my nails. It was so bad, my mom even bought some of that nail polish that tastes really bad, so you stop. But my little bird ass didn't care. I kept biting, can't stop. I felt like I needed to, but eventually I stopped, and I don't remember why. Sometimes I would walk around the house with a pillowcase on the top half of my body with the pillow still inside. It let me lay around the house in my own personal mobile relaxation station. Other times I would become obsessed with wearing the same specific Renaissance looking dress, walking around the house, or playing video games from morning till night like a forlorn maiden. I went through a phase where I was inspired by the live action movie and video game Tarzan to run around in nothing but underwear, pretending I could swing on vines and live as a feral child. That was until I was approaching puberty and my mom sighed, "You're getting too old for this." That one time I almost died because Arby's had the meats. Eventually, in my early single digits, my mom took me to the doctor because she wasn't sure if I was going to become malnourished from how little variety I ate. And the doctor told my mom, if the kid doesn't feel bad, just let them keep doing it. I didn't say I felt bad, and so my eating habits continued. After some years, I also ate Arby's roast beefs or other random, absolutely terrible meat products. Like at one point during my teens, I would come home and eat paper plate after paper plate of microwaved grilled chicken slices. Except once, I bit into an Arby's beef and I almost died. I'd be dead if my dad didn't serendipitously come out of the shower only to see me choking to death, no coughing, no straw in my drink, and save my goofy fucking life. Honestly, I've never been good at the basic responsibilities of having and upkeeping a human body. I hate brushing my teeth, washing my face, or doing my hair. And when I was a teen, I was gifted some bottles of peelable face masks and used both of them basically every night for I don't remember how long. No one saw me do it to tell me to stop. That, mixed with lifelong intense blushing, destroyed the pores on my face from a rather early age. At least in the eyes of the dehumanizing late stage capitalist commodification culture claiming we must appear porcelain. Ironically, in numerous other ways, whenever I noticed imperfections on my body, exactly all or nothing, yes, I would immediately remove them. Anything from a mole that was too big on the back of my right arm, I scratched off, to pimples during adolescence, attacking mosquito bites with thick bristled brushes until they'd bleed and become scarred, and surgically removing ingrown toenails myself. In middle school, if I noticed any peeling skin on the bottom of my feet, I would pick and peel them off. That turned into taking a pair of nail clippers to the thick skin on the bottom of my feet. I would get into a kind of trance. There would be piles and piles of dead skin. It created so many sores, I'd have to bandage them up, or I'd have to then bandage up. It would hurt extremely badly to walk that night, or sometimes for days. I know, I see, and that's why I'm sharing this shit, because I know that even though, like, nobody's gonna get this unless you've lived this life. Like, I'm sorry. This is like, I feel like me sharing this is like anyone that's ever been, that's why I don't even give anyone a time of day whenever they're like, you're not autistic. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry. Did you see my whole fucking life? Did you watch me eat the plastic container of pumpkin seeds and peel the skin off my bottom of my feet till it hurt to walk? Because I don't think you did. I'm pretty sure you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about because I live my whole life in my own fucking body. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah, and same, Harley. Absolutely. Thank you all for being here, by the way. This means, like I said, I'm reading this and it means everything to me that you're here, even if it's just like a small crowd right now. Um, this is me bearing everything that I've hidden for 30 years. So it means everything to have any amount of support, even if it was a single person here. So thank you for being here. Okay. It would hurt extremely badly to walk that night or sometimes for days. I have distinct memories of having to play softball with wounds on the bottom of my feet from it. I'd have to avoid my urge to limp like I wasn't in excruciating pain from repeated skin picking. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Hell yeah. Oh, thank you. As a kid, I was gifted a small box TV for Christmas and spent most of my nights watching Nick at Night until I fell asleep. I'd get so emotionally invested in the plot of I Love Lucy episodes that I would have to stop and remind myself that this was not real life and not happening to me. After I fell asleep, I'd have terrible and incredibly vivid reoccurring nightmares. Eventually, the only thing that worked was my mom suggesting I sleep next to her mother's rosary. I'd have to hold it in my hand and go under the covers to chase the evil things that came out at night. I don't remember how old I was, but once I remember I woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, realizing I'd wet the bed, and told my mom and told by my mom that I was too old to be doing this. When I was a child, I was called an old soul with a mature humor. In hindsight, this was because of my hyperlexia, stilted speech, and ventriloquizing adults. Yet as I aged, both my family treated me and consistently friends left me behind as if I was immature for my age. Whether that was because of how I acted, dressed, or the things I did for fun, it's a clear pattern. Learning. From an early age, I learned to read beyond my expected grade level. I was the kid in class that would correct the people reading on how to pronounce a word they couldn't faster than or at the same time as the teacher. But I learned early that I wasn't supposed to be smart. I learned from implicit and explicit observation and interactions that someone seen as a girl is not entitled to such things, and people, in fact, will hate them for that. Around fifth grade, I remembered deliberately not trying in school anymore and made a conscious effort not to appear smart, especially in front of boys. For most of my life, I've earned a completely average 2.6 GPA. But I learned a lot of this world from living a life of someone who doesn't care about the K through 12 education system that existed when I was attending it. While I wasn't dedicating energy towards learning whatever basic information to pass standardized tests and get into AP classes, I spent almost all my energy learning everything I possibly could about human minds and language use. On a day-to-day basis, primarily by my learning was just from watching people interact. I spent a lot of my early life incredibly confused at what was happening around me and convincing myself and everyone else around me that I wasn't, while undergoing constant micro-action observations. I thought I was becoming hyper attuned to what the little motions are supposed to mean. Most of my early life, I was simply watching others exist in a constant backseat mindset of this existence. My focuses fluctuated with the times. I was raised with the internet, after all. One of my earliest obsessions was eating disorders. I would spend hours and hours learning everything I could about them on websites where users were reporting their pro anorexia lifestyle in real time. I would beg my mom to drop me off at Borders when those still existed, so I could sit in the psychology and self help sections and learn everything I could get my hands on about anorexia. I became so fixated on it, I started embodying their behaviors myself until a friend expressed that they were worried about my behavior, and I realized my interest in it was in fact consuming me. That phase continued my already rather complicated relationship with eating. More on this later. Next, I became intrigued by a related self harmful path substance abuse. It started with a phase of reading all of Ellen Hopkins' books about teens, young adults, and adults using hard drugs and repeating abusive cycles of spending, sex, violence, homelessness, and other angsty desperations. After that was Wicca. In fact, one time my computer teacher in middle school accused me of burning down a rich family's barn in town just because I had a fucking herbalism book with me. One day, cops showed up at my house and asked me if my full name lived there. I said, yeah. They asked, is she at home? And I said, I don't know, I gotta go. I went to jump on my neighbor's trampoline, as planned, because ACAB. The bastards followed me there, started questioning me, a whole child without my parents present. They asked, do you know anything about so and so barn? And my silly kid ass asked back, why? Did it burn down or something? They said that. Like, imagine. And I didn't understand how ridiculous it was until after it happened. Like, it is one of the most ridiculous things that's ever happened to me, at least early in my life. I know they absolutely were. They had absolutely nothing to do. Needless to say, they must have really thought I burned the barn down with witchcraft after that. Turned out it was actually just a couple high school kids who didn't put out their cigarettes well. Oh, I have a typo there too. I'm gonna point out all my typos. A lot of my learning occurred through listening to music. I was an emo kid. Around 11, I started with Avril Lavigne and Yellowcard. About 12, I developed a taste for Say Anything, The Used, and Bayside. So yes, obviously, I did put the best lyrics into my aim away messages, thank you. Unfortunately, their songs frequently romanticized abuse. And when I get a taste for a certain song, I have a habit of always listening to it on repeat for days on end. I still do that. There's always been something delicious for me about being in the throes of one particular song. From a young age, I referred to myself as a lyrics person. I became obsessed with looking them up and knowing exactly what each lyric said. In hindsight, I could never understand what any of the lyrics said unless I also saw the lyrics. As I would listen, I'd mentally cycle through all the meanings that my brain could muster, referencing my own limited young lifetime. I'd lay in bed before I went to sleep listening to my favorite CDs, and it'd open a world of memories I'd watch present themselves. I can't invoke images in my head at will. Only in this space can I see them. This is the space where my feet do that thing only other autists know about. You know the one. It is also the space my poetry comes from, and where my unrequited infatuations are born. It is the secret I have kept closest to my chest, where all the hyperfixations of people live on in me, the medium of my frequently one sided infatuations and most inappropriate social temptations. I watch bits of phenomena fly around and catch their slices of life, cutting them into word bits. I chew them in my mouth when reading aloud, real good and gummy, spitting them into your ears. This in between space is also where my three critical media ecological tenets were formed. We only know what we know, everything becomes normal in repetition, everything is connected. Unfortunately, all my hyperfixations didn't make me immune from being seen as the bad guy. For example, one of the last memories of spending time with my older sister was on a family vacation to a timeshare in Michigan when I was in my mid teens. It was the time in my life I had begun to spend almost every car ride only listening to my personal CD player, and burn CDs were finally a thing. So I would sleep and or escape into my own mind to watch the memories. On the way to this cabin, I started to notice that the back of my head was getting unusually itchy. This had never happened before, and we were on our way to a vacation, so I kept it to myself thinking it was nothing. I didn't want to be seen as a bother. After hours of driving, we arrived at a couple cabins with a big tree that had a tire swing overlooking some cove on Lake Michigan. When we got inside and started to unpack, another typo, and started to up back, started to up back Stinghouse. The itching was spreading and really got getting out of hand. I decided to look in the mirror, and what I saw were raised patches spreading rapidly across more and more of my body, stemming from the back of my neck, head, and ears. When I told my family, they seemed to be rather disappointed that I told them bad news on their vacation. It was almost like they thought I willed a mysterious, horrifically itchy breakout onto my entire body. At one point, I remember not knowing what to do, so I sat in the car alone to not bother them. In efforts to not think about what was unfolding in my body, instead, I repeatedly listened to some Burns songs by Dashboard Confessional. Hands down, Vindicated, As Lovers Go, and Jamie. Some time passed. Now I was even more miserable. So my sister suggested that I lay in the sun because maybe that would make the itchy, raised red bumps go away. Spoiler alert, it did not. A combo of scratching and the sun, my welts were oh so much worse. So bad, in fact, they'd spread to the entire rest of my body, including my face. It was funny in a you might die kind of way. My family told me that I looked like the guy from Goonies kept in the basement. Finally, they began to take my medical woes seriously, and so we left the cabin and drove to the hospital back home. These doctors did not know what was going on with me. They just called it an allergic reaction. They recommended I see a skin specialist and prescribed allergy medications in the meantime. How's it going, Wilson? I'm reading my memoir. Welcome to my life. My torturous wealth stayed the same, and too long after that, my mom took me to see said specialist. Realistically, they didn't have many answers, but they recommended I undergo a combination of Zyrtec, Zantac, and ice baths. I remember sitting on the patient table while the doctor told my mom and I that due to the severity of these welts, that if they went internally, I would be dead. Long story short, I spent a number of weeks after that sleeping with ice packs on my face in the wind of many fans, the occasional ice bath, and oscillated between horrific itchiness and numb. We never found out what I was allergic to, if that even ever was the case, besides a couple medications the skin doctor prescribed me to have in attempts to reduce the welts in the first place, making them even worse. This was around 2005. So as luck would have it, it happened to be the time essential oils were arriving on the commodified scene. Also, congrats, Wilson, that's awesome. So one day when my parents were away and my sister was with me, I was inspired to put tea tree on them and they started fading. Oddly enough, that was the only thing that worked, was covering myself in tea tree oil. That incident was the single event in my entire life I have ever medically advocated for myself. I know my family did what they could with the limited knowledge they had, but that entire welt experience perfectly exemplifies the dynamic that constantly played out in our household. When it came to me expressing anything about myself or my needs, it was cast as unserious or made up. Another persistent example of how my family saw me as the bad guy were major US holidays. Real talk, I hate holidays. And that drove a wedge between my family members and I because they are the days you are unequivocally supposed to enjoy. As said, my sister, that's 11 years older than me, was always the good older child on holidays. She takes part in the entire social charade. Our age gap never allowed us to truly get to know one another. I have both fonder and grimmer memories of when she lived at home. The first grim one that comes to mind was when she sent me an email telling me the way I dressed was inappropriate around adult men in public, including her husband and our own father, because they're only men. We're polar opposites. I'll expand on how my sister and I's differences collide within chapter 3. For me, holidays were always just the days that I was yelled up to, immediately overstimulated by my mom, demanding I partake in preparation and to keep up a social performance of holiday cheer. The sensitivity I had to a pitch of my mom's voice when she yelled up to me, "Little bird, wake up, little bird," demanding that I get up early, come downstairs, hang out. That wasn't limited to holidays. Growing up, I was perpetually overstimulated from masking, though I didn't know that then. This is only something that I'm understanding fully in hindsight, that I would immediately come home and go straight up into my room to decompress from the day. This unknown sensory overstimulation ruined countless days I lived at home with my parents. When it got really bad, sometimes as a small child, I would go sit inside my own bedroom closet. Once I got older, I would go under all my comforters until I couldn't breathe and then open a corner so that fresh air could get in. This is something I sometimes do to this day when needed. Plus, I've never been good at holiday cheer. For most of my life, I'd last until after the meal and then find somewhere to escape. Anywhere people weren't, especially during the hugs goodbye portion. When I was little, I realized I could hide within my mom's side of the closet, under her clothes, and on top of her many shoes that lived inside my parents' bathroom. And I'd lock the door in fear that they'd make me hug them. It's the best. Yeah, that blanket cocoon with the breathing hole. As I got older, I realized I was allowed to day drink. That made holidays better for at least half of the day, but I still couldn't handle the full day. Years turned to decades until my escaping to my room after dinner became the normal. On the not Holly days, as soon as I could drive, I was never home. Why? Well, let me explain. I'm not a family guy. My parents were both 43 when they had me. Their birthdays are a week apart. They were our boomers. So I had an old-fashioned childhood compared to most millennials, and that there was lots of good old-fashioned discriminations of every kind, paired with verbal, mental, and emotional abuse that they called discipline. My parents met through friends at a point in their lives they both never thought they'd date again, yet they immediately connected. They had my sister 11 years earlier than me, so it should come as no surprise. I was, in fact, quite a surprise. My Roma mom grew up in the same working class town that I lived, drank, and loved in the year before I started my PhD. Growing up, she didn't know where her next meal was coming from. When she got married, she was 102 pounds. I know because she'd tell me, conveniently around the same time when she was often reminding me to suck in my gut the years after I'd hit puberty. When you were sick, my mom was the best caretaker you could possibly ask for. She always hosted Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners for our extended family, and as much as it stressed her out to organize it, she was really good at making sure the traditions were kept alive for our family. She kept the cleanest house I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen a lot of houses, being that we looked for a new one for about 15 years, but only moved twice in my lifetime. She kept our house as or even tidier than most model homes we went to so frequently. My mom was always a hugger. She always cut up vegetables and put them inside our fridge, probably because she knew that that was one of the only foods I'd eat as a kid, and that my dad would probably chomp on them too once in a while. She always demanded one day we were going to win the lottery. My mom had this habit of telling me what I used to like as a kid, and it always got on my nerves. But I understand now that that was her way of trying to show me that she loved me. She was the biggest Aerosmith fan I'd ever met in my life and drove a dark green Camaro. Her car always reeked of the sharpest floral perfume. I couldn't stand it. Everything in her car was either too loud or too that smell. Once when I was a kid, she was delivering Avon in it, as she often did then, and she bought me chicken nuggets for lunch that must have not sat right in my stomach, and I got sick in her back seat because the mixture of the car senses plus motion sickness must have been too much for my tum-tum. One time my mom got really angry, but her face looked funny, and I started laughing, and she chased me around the house in rage. My mom couldn't stand it if anything in her house wasn't situated exactly as she wanted it. One time she was yelling at me for putting something in the fridge in the wrong place, and I asked her what exactly the big deal was about where it was placed, and she only stared blankly at me. My dad grew up on the same brick road as the first White Castle. He was allegedly Irish and raised Catholic as a major part of his identity. I say allegedly Irish because our Ancestry.com documentation is shaky, being that his dad, my grandpa, was an orphan. Every day when I still lived at home, my dad absolutely had to eat dinner at 5 p.m. or he would get incredibly grumpy. He would salt everything, even pizza. My mom always made jokes about all of that. If we were all out at a restaurant and he was eavesdropping, the ear on the side he was listening got red, and my mom never let him hear the end of it. She'd tease him about being nosy. My whole life, my dad has had this habit of walking away from the TV during the start of a commercial break and repeating a word or two over and over that he'd just heard from whatever he was watching. I know little about my dad's early life besides the fact that he loved model trains. He was abused at Catholic schools by nuns who flipped desks and hit you if your shit didn't sit right inside of them, and he was in Nam, and like most, it traumatized him. Safe to say, he's seen some shit. His life of actions as a husband and father beforehand show that. My dad is the kind of hardworking boomer guy that was never allowed to feel or able to express his emotions until I was in high school. Like one day my dad had a few Bloody Marys and became upset about money. The following passage contains content about a threatened suicide. That night he became convinced my mom and I only loved him for his money, and he proceeded to have a traumatic drunken meltdown, during which he threatened to drive his car into an overpass on the way to work the next day. So I called the cops. He was then committed for a few days at a hospital. As my dad was being rushed to the hospital nearby, my mom and I drove to meet him in her car, and she said things to me that any child should never have to hear about their own father from their own mother. When we arrived and he was in intake, he blamed me for calling the cops, saying he was going to lose his job and that it would be entirely my fault. My dad's unaliving threat meltdown blaming me was the event that finally got him into therapy, unpacking his repressed emotions and traumas. Years later, he also pulled an Ebenezer Scrooge on us, dying for 15 minutes, and returned nicer. I've always been more like my dad. My mom said this too when she was alive. I joke I got anxiety from my mom and depression from my dad. On average, I don't have tangible memories of my childhood. But if I invite them, some vague memories of how the interactions with my parents went and what they taught me through them. Because of my sister and I's huge age gap later on, I was raised mostly as if I was an only child. I gotta drink water because I can tell the words are getting stuck in my mouth. For instance, my parents expected me to be a lot of things. They expected me to play the piano. My teacher said I could play by ear, but I gave it up because I didn't enjoy it. To be a gymnast, play soccer, and a perfect child that they could mold with discipline. My dad, in particular, made it very clear that I was not allowed to make any mistakes. Because if I did, he spoke and looked at me as if he wished I was never born. Before my older sister was born, they birthed a son named after my dad. But he lived for an incredibly short time because his lungs were not fully developed, organs that develop late inside utero. While my mom would do her best to impress femininity on me, in other ways it always seemed like my dad wished I was instead born a son. Technically both and neither of them were correct in their binary gendered expectations of me. My boomer parents never handled arguments in a healthy way, taught me how to cope, or apologized. I remember at a very young age looking down at them from the banister in our first house, where the upstairs looked down upon the living room they spent most of their nights in watching TV, after some sort of extreme emotional or verbal upset between us, and trying to judge if they had reached the point yet where they cooled off and pretended it never happened. In the moments of my childhood when it was only my dad having one of his regular hypercritical outbursts in reaction to if I accidentally spilled something, etc., Sometimes my mom would swoop in afterward as the good cop. It was then she'd remind me with conviction that I am so very smart and not to let anyone ever let me believe otherwise about myself. But then there was a time where something happened, I don't remember, that upset my mom enough she said she was going to leave our family. She drove away saying she'd never come back. Right after she left, my dad screamed at me, blaming me that I had pushed my mom to leave us forever. I don't remember how long after, but she came back like it never happened. I have many memories of running up to my bedroom, profusely crying and generally melting down because of something my parents said to me that made me feel like I wished I was never born. The first and only time I ever tried to unalive myself, I was young enough to still have one of those tiny handheld kid pianos in my bedroom. And I hit myself over the head with it hard, repeatedly, wishing I could just die after one particular argument. I don't even remember details. It wasn't easy to take mom's advice, but I guess I should have done what she said, not what she did. I was raised for most of my life, from 3 years old to 24 years old, inside the big suburban house my dad's big fancy BP Amoco job paid for, and then my creepily older cousin built. My parents made it clear that where we lived was much safer than about 15 minutes north. We got a miniature schnauzer that I named Rosie, and she was the best dog in the whole world. Inside our pantry, we often had tasteless, healthy cereal like grape nuts, shredded wheat, and Special K. My parents didn't let me date until I was 16. I did as much as any millennial did anyway. My parents did the best that they could with what they were given, and what they were almost certainly both given were undiagnosed autisms and every discrimination on the market. For instance, I never truly believed in any Abrahamic God, but they both did in some capacity. I never understood why, and ever since I was a baby, I rebelled against attending their churches. I would cry and cry and cry as an infant until they'd give up and drive baby me back home. As a toddler, more of the same, in itchier, more elaborate outfits. I swear I can like feel being in those outfits right still. In itchier, more elaborate outfits they put me in to attend hell. Every Sunday morning felt like some kind of torture. Time was elusive as a child, and my tracing the shapes on the outside of the Bible never tided me over for the entire service. I also hated being made to touch the clammy hands of strange older people sitting near me. The one good part of the service was that after third grade, I got the tasty wafers and wine. Wine for children? Okay. A progressive thing they instilled in me was a holistic sex ed as boomers were able to. And by they, I mean mostly my mom. She gave me one of those everything you need to know about your body, inappropriate stuff for TikTok probably that would get me banned, books when I was about 9 years old. I had loads of questions, and while sometimes she was probably annoyed knowing the veracity of my questioning, as far as I remember, she always offered her honest answers. My mom was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2017 because of poisons brought home on my dad's work clothes. She wasn't allowed to open a bank account in her own name by herself until she was in her 20s and took me to the bank as soon as I turned 16 because she'd be damned if I didn't have one as soon as possible. My mom referred to us as gypsies endearingly her whole life. She taught me to take care of myself financially before anyone else, and certainly not to rely on any man if I can because of it. Because she lived a life of it. She helped me pay off credit card debt multiple times and paid for my move to pursue my PhD shortly after she won her lung cancer blood money. She died at home on hospice in August 2020 because corporations in the United States are allowed to poison our loved ones to death for profit for blood money. I think my mom did the best that she could with what she was given, and what she was given was poisoned to death. Without my mom, I never would have written my dissertation about sexual ecologies in the algorithmic age. Sorry, the thing about recounting your whole life, it's hard. So, thank you for being here. Everyone knows that like if you spend more than like a half hour with me, there's a good chance that if I say anything, I'm gonna burst into tears. So, this is no exception. And thank you for understanding. or neuroqueer realizations. Thank you. Because of her as a kid, I was the friend you'd go to for sex questions. Speaking of, and then I have like, before I transition to the next header, I have in parentheses right after this section. As I explained much more extensively in chapters 4 and 5, I don't blame my family for only knowing what they knew. This inequitable world and reductive concept of autism failed us all. Let me get a drink of water, and thank you so much, everyone. The next section I called Friends, as bad as any sitcom. Real talk, I don't remember enough to cover my lifetime of friendships, but I will be taking readers down a path of the more prominent friendships I do remember and reflecting on them. Since I was about 4, I played a lot of video. Notice I was like, I have to mention video games first. There's something I don't know why they're not friends, but they're friends. Since I was about 4, I played a lot of video games and would ask my dad to go to Hollywood Video every Friday to rent a new game. Most days, from morning until night, that was how I preferred to spend my focused energy. I was in preschool then, and one of my only memories of being in preschool, besides this, was being chased around by a boy on Halloween Day who was dressed as Sonic the Hedgehog. My mom and other parents at the school party told me he must have a crush on me. I learned young that boys are predatory if they have feelings for you. It doesn't matter how I actually feel about it. My feelings weren't mentioned to me. I just ran away. At home, I also played outside. At first, it was with little girls who lived across the street, but I realized after a few years they wanted to play house, and I was no good at that. My best friend of mine in the neighborhood would come out to play with me nearly every day. When we played outside, we would often pretend to be in relationships or made elaborate dances to Disney movie scenes. I had my first kiss with her while we played Lion King, Simba, and Nala inside of my family's pantry. The two of us also often played video games, or she'd watch me play by myself. There's two pictures I considered including in here where there's like, like imagine me right now, but like one of them is me at the age of like 7 or 8, sitting at the okay. So there was this bar next to the TV, like the box, one of those old box TVs that used to be in our family kitchen, as if there's like another kitchen in our house, the kitchen, our kitchen. And I would pull the chair right up to the TV. Like I would be so I forgot to mention that actually. I feel like that might have been something to add. But anyway, I would sit right next to that fucking TV. My mom would always say stuff like, "You're gonna ruin your eyes sitting so close to that TV." I didn't give a fuck. It made me feel like I was in control of the game, being closer to the game and holding the controller. Even though it made no sense, I needed to physically be close to it to play the game and feel like I was actually controlling the character, or else I had like no sense. And honestly, in hindsight, it's probably because of my what the fuck's it called? Proprioception issues or whatever the fuck it's called. You know what I'm talking about? Where you like kind of lose sight of where your body ends and where anything else begins. That's why I was doing it. Because I felt like I was in the seat to then be the character on the screen and could actually play. Okay? So anyway, I was sitting at that seat as I did all the time for basically my entire childhood and teen years. And I was just like a fucking zombie, like zonked out, like sitting at the side, like holding a controller, just like just like that. And so there's one of me like that I included, I thought about including here. And then there's another one where I'm like 6 years older, doing the exact same thing next to that neighbor who I gave a popsicle to, and we used to play Bomberman and shit. Like, and she would just sit next to me watching me play. Like, like the most obviously, like anyone that isn't autistic isn't gonna just be like, you want to watch me play video games? You want to go to my house and watch me play video games by myself, and then you won't play the video games? Like, but that's what I fucking did for some. Anyway, let's continue. Where, yes, okay. I remember she'd go to daddy daughter dances with her dad, and she made them sound so normal that I asked my parents about them, and they told me I will absolutely not be doing that. I know it actually it can be fun, and it's funny because later on in my life, I did actually like there in chapter two specifically. I talk about how this one relation. I don't even know what to call it. It's not even fair to call it a relationship per se. You'll see when you. I'm not going to be reading chapter two on the internet because I would get banned from everything if I did realistically. But if anyone continues on to read chapter two, you will see that there was a point in my life where I've spent plenty of years just watching men play video games, so I completely get it. Okay, we used to play this game in her family's garage, where we took these bouncy balls and would whip them out of control at something inside the garage, and then apologize to it to what they hit, and then absolutely die laughing together. Her parents understandably hated it, but that shit was fun. I would have sleepovers at her house, and she told me in the morning silly shit I said in my sleep. Sometimes we'd play Donkey Kong Country 2 or Sunset Riders at her house on Super Nintendo. One time, my family and I visited downtown Chicago, and I had a salad there that included edible flowers. I came home and told her excitedly that flowers were edible. Imagine. Just like imagine me as a child and then people not knowing what autism is and then being like, this is a normal kid. This is a kid that isn't autistic. Like, what the fuck? No. Like, what are you talking about? And so we went around that day foraging from our immediate neighbors' flower bushes and eating them. I told my mom when I got home and she scolded me saying, they could have been poison. I could have needed to get my stomach pumped. I goofily responded, well, they weren't, and I didn't. A couple times we hung out in my basement and pretended that some pool balls were our real boobs. We thought it was funny to hold them under our shirts and pretend to act like real adults. My dad caught us doing that once, and it was as hilariously embarrassing and or wait, no, it was a hilariously embarrassing and ridiculous moment. I thought I had another typo, but I didn't. People aren't sure whether we're sarcastic. I know exactly. Yes, I mean, and I talk about that a little bit later. I think I forget if I guess I actually surprisingly never mentioned the nervous laugh that I honed because I've talked about it on TikTok. I think, but like the because of what you just said, Harley, people not being sure whether we're sarcastic, joking, or being honest. I've developed, and everyone. I mean, the friend of mine in my master's who I first told like I think I'm probably autistic after the years of suppressing it that I also talk about later in this book. They were like, "Of course you are." Like you have that nervous laughter that you do that like is deliberately ambiguous so that people don't know what the fuck is actually going on in your head, but I know exactly what that is. And I was like like my mask fell off and I was like whatever. There you look inside my brain. Like, who do you think you are? Like, anyway, and I love that I actually started the next paragraph with anyway. Anyway, back to what I was saying about this little neighborhood girl. My first friend, her older brother always picked on me for reasons I didn't understand. Then I'd cry and run home. There came a time when the rest of the little girls across the street grew rude to me for reasons I also didn't understand. So one day, I cussed at one of them, and her mom heard, and they ostracized me. Meaning, then on, they always played at that house I wasn't allowed at, so coincidentally. Not that I'm excusing the fact that I cussed at a neighborhood girl who was younger than me, but it did exemplify another point in my life where I simply couldn't get along with other girl children. Eventually, some other little kids, boys, moved in directly behind my house, and I had much more in common and fun with them than I ever had with any of my front of the house girl neighbors. We would watch movies, play video games, or watch the youngest brother play really cool computer games that I didn't know how to play. They had a ping pong table, one of those basketball games, a foosball table, a pool table, moon shoes, and a bunch of other cool toys. They'd have these massive squirt gun fights and would invite all the other kids over to fight. My left something in my hallway just felt like someone dropped a bunch of tin cans. I don't know what that was. Sorry. My left next door neighbors. Oh, thank you for the follow, Megrim. Or is it McGream? I like that either way. My left next door neighbors owned authentic restaurants. Or authentic rest. Well, I guess I forgot. I don't know if I did editing. They were authentic Mexican restaurants in the area. They had a pool and let neighbor kids swim in it in the summers. What's up, Cheever? I'm reading my fucking memoir that is published officially this morning. The Ghost of Jacob Marley. That is, I fucking love that. I love everything about that. The amount of times I've seen Scrooge is unreal. In fact, it's amazing I didn't mention that in the list of things that I used to watch over and over and over and over again, because I also absolutely watched the fucking Disney Scrooge over and over and over. And I've seen that thousands of times. Oh, so it's the link to my memoir. I saw it's on Kindle, and then it's also on it's published. I'm finding typos, so just deal with that, but it's still understandable. Like the typos, I actually don't care. Thank you. Pulled a Scrooge and died for 15 minutes. Exactly. Yeah. Ebenezer Scrooge. Yes. I figured that that's why y'all were referring to it, but I wasn't sure. But yeah, the link tree that's in my bio. Oh, I see. Oh, I definitely watched a fuck ton of the Robin Hood. Also, with yes, I watched that so much. Along with, I can't believe I didn't mention these. Along with Robin Hood Men in Tights. Oh my god, the amount of I've seen all of these just an unreasonable amount of times. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for your support, Noah Nation, and for just yeah. I mean, this first chapter and the intro are gonna be on my YouTube. Once if I as long as I remember to export it and publish it, which I realize the most recent readings I keep forgetting to do that. So sorry if anyone was hoping to watch those later. Okay, I'm gonna reread that just because I feel like we probably lost the plot. My left next door neighbors owned authentic Mexican restaurants in the area. They had a pool and let neighborhood kids swim in it in the summers, and they hosted family parties many of us attended regularly. Achoo! Bless you! It's nice to see you, Zed. In their pool, we pretended to be mermaids, and I swear I breathed underwater like magic. I grew up eating their homemade tamales that they drop off at off at our door after making batches. When we were younger, I'd hang out sometime with our youngest son playing Mortal Kombat on the hugest TV I'd ever seen in my life at the time. I remember falling once, scraping my knee, and he put a band aid on it. Then I realized he was the first person who wasn't my mom to do so. It felt incredibly intimate in a way I didn't know how to feel about at the time. He was always rather flamboyant, and my very first crush was on Elton John, so do the math. Anyway, I have a vivid memory of being on a very fancy jungle gym with many boys and them asking me why I don't play with girls in the neighborhood. I replied, "We don't have much in common. They always want to play house and pretend to have babies, and I find that boring." Why would I want to do family stuff when I could run around and go on adventures and shit? As a kid, I remember if I got a drink at if I got a drink at one of my friends' houses, I'd notice the smell of the inside of their cups. Like for some reason, the smell of their house lingered inside there the most. I also enjoyed looking inside their family's refrigerators to see what they kept inside it. As cis heteronormativity would have it, by parents, I was treated like I had fallen in love with one of the backyard boys. He was the middle brother of three. I was not ever in love with him as much as I was taught that he should be a focus of my attention. Pressure makes me incredibly anxious, but I didn't know exactly what my feelings meant at the time. I just knew this is what people told me was supposed to happen, and it made people around me laugh and smile. So despite feeling more than a bit queasy about the experience, it was kind of fun in that I didn't know it was fear. Speaking of kids being mean to me as a child, at some point in grade school, I started taking the bus from my house to school. And in doing so, I was bullied so badly that my mom literally paid a neighbor boy to protect me from the bullies there because I would come home crying every day. I don't have recollection of what actually happened there, and that's probably for the best. This was also around when my mom took me to various daycares so she could work during the days. The whole place smelled like Play-Doh and that square cafeteria pizza that's far too oily. My main recollection of that experience is one time she forgot to come pick me up, and I was left waiting with one of the staff members who tried to be as sympathetic as they could. Around this age, I remember this one time I was at a friend's birthday at a bowling alley. And I guess I bit off more than I could chew between chewing gum, drinking a slushie, and devouring pizza because I went to sneeze and threw up what looked like the meteor from the start of that one 90s Power Rangers movie all over where the stairs attached to our lane and cried from laughing. I, pizza was probably also Play-Doh. I mean, it's easy to confuse the Play-Doh pizzas with the pizza that looks like and tastes like Play-Doh. Anyone can make that mistake. Oh, thank you. I do my best despite the reading, you know. I wanna try to like interact because it means everything to me that y'all are here listening to me disclose all the secrets that I've kept from everyone my whole life. So thanks for hanging out. Okay. Okay, yes. Oh yes, I just ate the pizza. I threw up the meteor. I remember where we are. In grade school, I had one best friend, and we were both absolutely obsessed. First with Hanson, which I promised was not a phase, and I'd be in love with forever, and then NSYNC. Most of our in school friendships revolved around singing NSYNC songs or pulling out their magazine clippings to admire Justin Timberlake under a waterfall. If you're a millennial, you know the one. Shortly after the Waterfall Centerfold came out, she got a crush on a boy in our class, and I remember feeling pressured to do the same. Like that was what I was supposed to do. So I immediately tried to act natural, performing having a crush on that guy's best friend. Because that's what teenagers were doing on the TV. Obviously, a best friend double date was the ultimate idea sold to us, and so regardless of if I was even attracted to boys at all, why not? I remember that I was also bullied by certain kids at school. The normal pecking order shit. I have been uncomfortable around people as long as I can remember, stumbling on my words, and I have blushed profusely on my face and chest, my heart and my sleeve, since I was a kid. The other kids clearly picked on the fact I was different, awkward, and they insulted how I looked. Unfortunately, as soon as middle school came around, InSync friend developed early, got an older boyfriend, and so apparently both of these things made her too popular to be with me. If I'm being honest, a lot of my early life I don't remember or couldn't read the room to understand. I'm sorry. I like I literally feel like I should just on every single page at the top of each page it like be like I'm so sorry if you relate to this. Like just know that like the whole time if you relate to any of this, I'm so sorry. Like I'm so sorry. Cuz I wish no one did. But it's also important for the reason if you do. So, okay. Oh yes. As puberty hit and middle school started, I was being bullied more on the bus by other kids until a neighborhood girl in a more affluent area started to defend me and pulled me under her wing. Her mom owned a car dealership and she wore mostly Abercrombie and Hollister. You know the type. Anyway, her and I became nearly inseparable for a few years. In fact, her mom ended up becoming my godmother during my confirmation. My dad forced me to take part in, or else I wouldn't be able to live in his house. For most of that time, I became her naive follower to survive both on and off the bus. Needless to say, she took full advantage of my vulnerabilities. My mom would drop me off at her rich mom's house for a day, or sometimes even the entire weekend. Rich friend was skinnier and tanner than me, and it was 2001-ish, so peak body hate. The 1990s 2000s media industry was absolutely relentless in selling emaciated images of over sexualized, unattainable teenage, typically white or whitewashed AFAB bodies. So every millennial felt even more shame about themselves during one of the most delicate developmental times, making us more vulnerable to commodification. Mind you, I am queer, and I was not allowed to be queer openly for most of my life because I was born and raised in Indiana. I have a vivid memory of being at an after school camp one day in elementary school and being called gay as an insult by two older kids while I was doing some pull ups. Pull ups are bad enough without homophobia. Luckily, my child mind pulled through. I had no idea what gay meant yet. Thank you. Anyway, well, at this girl's house, I lived on almost exclusively one or two honey buns she'd sometimes let me have. Mind you, no adults ever asked if I ate. That paired with the fact I was at this person's house who first protected me from bullies, I felt like it would be too much if I asked for more food to eat. So denial of regular food for me was treated as apparently normal. You might be thinking, whose responsibility was it to ensure you ate food? Good question. This friend's treatment of me only escalated from there the longer I was around. She seemed to take pride in treating me like her minion. There were also a couple moments of queerness treated as our secret and later lauded over me as if I could be so lucky to. She lived near a neighborhood boy that eventually hung out with us sometimes. We were all also on the same school bus. For some reason, I decided to disclose to her that I think I might have a crush on him. She started treating me weird about it when we were alone. Then her treatment escalated. One day, he was over, and we three went to the side of her house. She started pressuring me to kiss him in front of her. I didn't want to do that. I had never kissed a boy at the time, and I didn't want my first time to be like that. It made me really uncomfortable in a way that I didn't know how to describe. She repeatedly called me prude right in front of him for not doing it. It was all really fucking weird. And it was like they were both in on some joke making fun of me. One of the last things I remember about our friendship was apparently they started seeing each other in whatever capacity. For all I know, maybe they always were, and I was always just some joke to her. Anyway, this last time I remember, she invited me over and I was treated as a third wheel while her and that same guy started messing around under a blanket. Again, I trusted her and expressed feelings for him, yet she treated me as an excuse for her mom so she wouldn't be alone with this guy, rather than a full human being with thoughts, feelings that deserved respect. Luckily, the rest of that friend group that she ate lunch with eventually came to my aid and all admitted they were concerned for me because she treated me terribly. Long story short, I became nearly inseparable with one of them. At the age of 12, I orphaned myself out at her house almost every weekend to avoid being at home. She lived on the farthest side of town from me, and obviously I couldn't drive yet, so my mom would drop me off and chat with her mom for a while. Stoner friends survived some shit too. How you doing? I'm reading my memoir, the first chapter. Welcome. I'm so glad to see you. Okay, and I think I'm gonna. I forget if you said there was a free copy of the reading that you told me about. It was something to do with indigenous knowledges, and I wanna remember what that is. I gotta check out your Instagram messages. But anyway, thank you for being here. We'd walk from her house to the local burger joint habitually and split a burger and get some fries. Often we'd walk to a park down the street until one night we went to do that after a bit of drinking, and on the way I stopped to pee in a bird bath because peeing in a bird bath, as someone whose lifelong nickname is Bird, was a funny thing to do as a tipsy teen. And then an adult man chased us both back to her house. Her mom ended up having to actually get a restraining order against the adult man because afterward he repeatedly walked his dog suspiciously close to her house, and she needed to fucking stop him. At school lunchtime, I'd gravitate around some of the many circles of friends, staying mostly on the periphery of each group. This nice neighborhood girl who always tried to be a good person was a swimmer at the time, and I remember trying to do that for a bit too, until I learned I could not physically stand the feeling of wearing a swimming cap and being made to sweat inside the water. Thank you for that heart, by the way. Her friend group of other swimmers got a lot of homophobic comments thrown at them, and it always made me hurt to see that. But I needed to hide at that time, so I didn't speak up for them. I have major regrets about not defending them and sympathy for a deeply closeted version of me. I remember one time a popular kid pretended to have a crush on me, and I was gullible enough to fall for it. Apparently, he thought I, and my willingness to trust, was a walking, talking joke. Seventh grade was also the time when AOL Instant Messenger, AIM, and flip phones arrived. I developed a crush on a boy and asked for an entire class's screen names just to get his. It worked. We chat for hours and hours and hours late into the night, and I became completely infatuated. Little did I know at the time we were partaking in a quintessentially millennial secret friendship. I was a deep thinker very young and consumed basic existentialism and psychology voraciously. I have one distinct memory of hiding Sartre's No Exit at Borders so no one else would buy it. Also, thank you for the rose, William. Beyond blogging, I reflected on my thoughts within his AIM window all hours of the day and night. In hindsight, it was where a lot of my early interest in identity formation and language bloomed. Shortly after this, when I started hanging out with punk kids, or shortly after this was when I started hanging out with punk kids and going to shows. Going to shows let me meet other people who preferred rejecting or being rejected by normative society, as well as stimming in public while zonked out in a loud public space with ambiance. This was also the age I started drinking. I held off on weed for a year. put a pin in this until chapter 2. All my friends smoked but me then, yet one of their moms accused me of being the bad guy. Be the bad guy in italics. So I'm going to make a distinction, I think, shortly between the bad guy in italics and the bad guy in, or no, sorry, I just did the opposite. That was confusing. It's like, how old are you? I'm 3. Like, so bad guy in italics is being a bad discriminatory person who is problematic. Bad guy in quotes is being hated and discriminated against for being autistic. Okay, I explained that later, but I wanted to just tell everyone now so that you can get a better idea. I know, I wonder, to be honest. I mean, it seems like every communication theorist that talks about identity often is, but I don't, who knows? I mean, I think that we very much have a different motivation to do that than many other people. Actually, hold on, before I do this, let me close my blinds because it's getting dark, and I always feel weird whenever it's dark and then you have lights on your house and everyone can see in your house. So I'm gonna be right back. Okay, so be the bad guy, as in the bad way. Okay? Let's back up so you can understand how, in other ways, I was, in fact, the bad guy. I know it's so, right? I think that, like, I remember talking to someone who, or maybe like just hearing about it in class. Like, it might have been when I was in French class. Yeah, it was in French class for sure, actually, because I remember the instructor saying like people in France think that Americans are really fucking weird because they always like they have so many windows allowing people to just peer into their home. Like, and I was just like whatever, I don't know. But yeah, at night it's definitely, as soon as I started to learn, and I, you know what, actually there's a point in my life I forgot to include where there was a peeping tom when I was like 24 after my parents moved in this condo. And I can't believe I forgot to include this. In fact, I mentally, so because of just the onslaught of memories that my mind has been like, put this in too, the last week, I forgot to add this. But there was a point when I was 24 where basically the neighbor across the street from me was peeping in my window, and I didn't know that he could see in. Okay? So I literally bought a poster board and markers and wrote, I need feminism because peeping Tom. And I kept it in my window for like 2 years. Okay? Like, it's because when I saw him, I was naked. And then I saw that he was holding what looked like a camera. Okay? So basically, I saw that he saw me. I saw that he saw me because he reacted. He closed the blinds. They closed like this, and then I'd closed my blinds. I peered through again, and I saw that he'd fixed them. So this adult man across the street from me who is peeping on me absolutely saw that I saw him and reacted. And I was like, I'm gonna make sure that people know that you're a fucking jerk. Like, I'm gonna keep it up so that everyone knows in the general vicinity that you are a fucking creep that has violated my privacy. And yeah, right? Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. I was very punk at that point, so that was a very, that's true. And I thank you for saying that. Okay, anyway, back to me being a bad person, though. This is a point in my life where I was genuinely learning to be a terrible person, and I'm about to get to this, so here we go. Without further ado, um, okay, let's back up so you can understand how, in ways, I was in fact the bad guy. This was a very complicated and nuanced experience that I believe plays out uniquely all over the US. Me, I was born and raised in Munster, Indiana, which for anyone who doesn't know is mostly white. However, they say the Northwest Indiana region I grew up in is the most socioeconomically and racially diverse area in the country. But until I was old enough to drive, even just 5 or 10 minutes away from my house, aka for most of my early life, I was mostly living and just seeing exclusively other white people around me. Due to the white flight, redlining, and gentrification, the school district that I was raised in was one of the richest in the area. Which is to say, at that point in my life, zero until I was 16, most everyone that I had ever met had assimilated into United States concepts of whiteness and were speaking the violences of that racial process daily. Thus, one theme from my early life was seeing and hearing people make comments and alleged jokes that were ableist, racist, cis heterosexist, fatphobic, and classist, etc. Except at that time, I didn't know what any of those things meant. Discriminatory comments were just the words and actions the people around me made as everyday conversation. They were what happened around me by my family and those who said they were my friends. People being mean and or straight up dehumanizing to one another for who they are was normal. So in early life, I learned to be normal to survive. And I'm not proud of it, but I did my fair share of bullying others for who they were because of how I was treated before that. I learned to be ruthlessly nitpicky towards other kids who struggled socially at least as much or more than me. I learned that by doing that, the attention was then taken off of me, a theme as cliche as any 90s Nick or Disney narratives. By the time that I entered high school, I had conflicting best friends who I'd spend days with outside of school and the occasional sleepover. The first was Stoner Friend. The second I got connected with through another neighborhood girl who had moved in later than the boy neighbors behind my house. As I explained earlier, I'd always had a challenging time making friends with girls, and this neighbor girl was not an exception. But overall, this neighbor girl is wholesome, and as far as I could tell, always made a good effort to be a good person and do the right thing, which I majorly respect her for. I know exactly, for sure. No, that's so real. However, when we first met, she had been lifelong best friends with another girl who was not our neighbor. This other girl was sporty, thin, very funny, and charismatic. To explain, the town of Munster is divided by a railroad track that separates most newer subdivisions. Due to my dad's BP job, I was raised on the subdivision side, whereas she lived on the other side. Her family is Italian, Cubs fans, obsessed with their Shih Tzu. The following passage contains content that includes racial slurs. I won't say them, obviously. But, yeah. My most prominent memories of this non-neighborhood girl were when I was over, we would watch Austin Powers a lot, and then we'd do impressions. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but eventually those Austin Powers impressions translated into ever so casual racist remarks, which she framed as jokes. Because in the 90s, jokes were often racist as fuck. She used slurs like slurs I'm not gonna say, that her family clearly taught her, because her dad had absolutely no shame in saying them himself when people were at his house. Racist jokes were repeated almost constantly around me when I was a teenager, as if they were totally jovial things to say in private, because most often when white people in the US say we, they often mean white. Because in the US, racisms are historically and factually normal. By struggling to be seen as normal as a teen, I became an enabler of my friends' bad ideas, comments, and behaviors. Whether that was internalized cis heterosexisms, fat phobia, racisms, or cheating on their boyfriends, and substance abuse galore. These were all things that not only hurt myself as a deeply hidden neuroqueer NB, but also those who were more marginalized than me. Which is to say, as a kid who always struggled to fit in, I laughed at and then made those racist jokes back because the person who said they were my friend at the time made them, and I didn't want to get bullied more. Remember, due to color-paved racisms in the United States, as a teenager, the area I was raised in was predominantly white. But it's not like there weren't East or West Asian people around me just trying to build a life in the US without experiencing wide-reaching, taken for granted, and systemic anti-Asian hatred, and or were being pressured to assume a role of an oppressive model minority stereotype. I didn't know that at the time or how pervasive they are. Regardless, there's no excuse for my implicit and or explicit discriminations. The flip side is her entire Italian family told these racist jokes because somewhere along the line, their ancestors assimilated into US concepts of whiteness, and so they did too, losing their culture. There is an exceptionally long history of people newly assimilating into whiteness being racist towards groups of people who have been placed lower on the racial hierarchy than them. One main inevitability of the race and racialization process of whiteness is it erases and destroys. And I am a product of that cultural destruction myself. I'm only learning I'm only this year learning that, being that I am Roma, and nearly all of my ancestors are from somewhere in Czechoslovakia with documentation that does not go back before 1880. Thus, my ancestors were most likely enslaved in Romania for 500 years. For those who don't know, Roma people are still hated internationally. We are stereotypically cast and dehumanized as gypsies and thieves. My ancestors have no homeland to speak of, and I learned that far too late because of their assimilation into whiteness. There is a significant likelihood I will never regain my cultural heritage thanks to their choices. My point in disclosing this all is that it speaks volumes that these racial slurs and harmful racial stereotyping were taught to me as a kind of friend bonding activity. Beyond that, and what I mentioned at the start about my parents' comments on the safety of our subdivision, I learned almost all other racisms at an early age from entertainment and news media stereotyping. Again, I knew maybe a single black person in real life then. So at the impressionable time, that was all I knew. This does not excuse my racisms. It explains how racisms became normal in repetition. And without a doubt, this is one example among other forms of racial violences I've inflicted. Some folks, despite seeing who I work to be 20 some years later, might understandably react to the racist actions of one of my many past selves and hate me for it. If that person is you, know I understand and respect your reaction. In my own way, that is how I react to the teen stage of myself, too. I hope my contextualization of this racism that I was socialized into sparks further reflections for people who, in their unique ways, were taught every discrimination under the sun. Realistically, the internalized fat phobia, classisms, racisms, cis heterosexisms all run deep in us. I am not a perfect person, and I have been molded by this world like anyone else. Please understand. It wouldn't be healthy for me to continue to hate a past version of myself that knew what I knew. Speaking of things becoming normal in repetition, that friend also stopped hanging out with me entirely as soon as the opportunity arose to become a popular high school cheerleader. Then she told me, "You're so lucky no guy will ever be interested in you just for your looks." A bold claim from someone who conforms to cishet standards, yet I taught how to masturbate. Throughout this memoir, I differentiate between my having been one, the italicized, the bad guy, a bad person because I took part in many normalized discriminations since I either didn't understand or it was second nature for me to mimic others around me, B, inability to understand non-autistic flirting because of my life in the sexually violent US ecology, which inclined me to project resentment onto cis men, those who are assigned male at birth, and then despite gender being made up and changeable, also identify as men, as a group for violating my body mind time and time again, and socially perverted my ability to differentiate between where bullying ends and flirting begins. C, my inability to cope and emotionally regulate on my own or with others due to never being taught those skills by my loved ones, which then paired disastrously with my 30-year-long unregulated autistic hyperempathy. And two, being cast as the bad guy, in quotes, aka being discriminated against for existing as an unrealized autistic person due to my textbook PDA profile autistic traits: hyperlexia, stilted speech, autistic emotional affect, black and white thinking, my downplayed, bastardized social and communication difficulties, my disregard for social hierarchies that are inequitable and do not make sense, direct speaking style exhibiting non-feminine enough characteristics, overly literal autistic interpretation patterns, compulsory heterosexuality as a repressed queer millennial, etc. It is crucial to mention I was discriminated against for being textbook autistic before knowing I was and before traumas. In certain regards, my autism made me significantly more vulnerable to abuse and sexual violences. In other ways, as you will see in Chapter 2, my autistic ability to mask while falsely imprisoned protected me. From ableist eyes, my autism systematically excludes me from my humanity and delegitimates my research expertise. Ableists inside and outside of academia are notorious for ventriloquizing ahistorical eugenicist and fascist rhetorics that have been built into the system as features. For this and more, my main message is how humans act as media in our society building processes. In an unlikely turn of events, one early lesson that grounds the motivation for my critical media ecological work stems from my first job at the BK Lounge, Burger King. I could not drive on my own yet, but I had my driver's permit, so I was damn close. Shortly after I got the job, my parents surprised me by showing up to my job in a white soft top Cavalier convertible. Honestly, it was one of the coolest things they ever did for me besides give birth. I was very lucky to have it, and I had many nice drives in that little car. That job was an okay first job in that it wasn't all that difficult, even though it majorly stressed me out, and I absolutely snuck and ate far over my wages in slushies, grilled chickens, and chicken fries with my coworkers. I really loved my coworkers at that job. Most of them were very cool and much different people than I'd ever met before, in that they were from nearby towns and areas I hadn't spent time in at the age of 16. I expand on a few more influential lessons I learned from coworkers there within chapter 2. The following passage contains content about unaliving. Tragically, not too long into this job, one of my teen coworkers unalived himself. It was shocking. Our high school was devastated by it. Nothing like that had ever happened during my time there. I didn't know him that well, but I worked plenty of shifts with a guy, and he was one of the funniest and seemingly most happy guys I'd ever met. But isn't that what people almost always say after? A lot more people seemed to love him than he knew. He His funeral line seemed endless. Not that you can always judge if people genuinely cared by if they attend someone's funeral. It made me realize that even someone who appeared so loved could feel completely alone anyway. Did he feel like he was the bad guy too? If I can. If I can, I want to make sure no one ever feels like that. This is also why I am sharing my life from a Dr. Bird's eye view, both as an expert of identities, language, intimacies, and institutions, and a millennial who's made life changing neuroqueer self realizations. My hope in writing this is that my doing so will reveal how I was introduced to discriminations, work to unlearn them while enduring unique ableisms and cis heterosexisms. Throughout my life, I have both contributed to racisms and been oppressed in many other ways, most of which, as they happened because of my unrecognized autism, I didn't understand then. That's the violent challenge of being born into a world where multiple forms of oppression bleed into each other simultaneously. My experience as an unrealized autist inclined me to trust others to do the right thing, and I then mimic or repeat them without being able to know or possibly grasp the fullness of historically oppressive structures as a child. This is exactly how oppressive language usage frequently works, inevitably leading us to hurt ourselves and others in confusion. Again, my experience could never and does not represent all autists, and I would never claim that they do. But in a world built as inequitably as this one, in my early life, I was complicit and discriminatory. We were all born into a world that existed long before we got here and lived the violences of that. I believe there is a strength to be gained from acknowledging both the ways that we are raised into committing acts of violence, as well as telling tales of surviving violences. Inevitably, most all of us alive today are situated in both positions of benefiting as some type of oppressor and in other ways experiencing oppression. I am of the opinion that oppressors, past and present, should be more open about how they harm as a part of dismantling and decolonizing. This book transparently documents my unrealized, substance abusing, sexually violated autism. As you will see, most of my life, I wasn't myself at all. It was much easier to live as the bad guy, in italics. In a world as inequitable as this one, by most, I have been welcomed, praised, and embraced for staying silent in the face of discriminations, and thus was matter of factly being the bad guy. Hold on, let me blow my nose real quick. So obviously when I say that, I mean I was being a terrible person. Objectively, at least not, not by the norms standard, but if you have a fucking conscience and know anything about history. I was the person that people preferred. Now ever since my Now, ever since my 20s, due to taken for granted discrimination against autists, my sharing knowledge and direct speaking makes me the bad guy. That's chapter one. So there you have it. That's the beginning of my life as I knew how to tell it recently over the course of the last couple weeks. So I hope that you enjoyed it. Um, it's definitely I've never been prouder. Um, it's such a weird thing to have like I gotta be honest, and because of like and I say this just very straightforwardly, you know what I mean? Like I when I said in the intro that there's a significant chance I shouldn't be alive right now. I mean it. I mean it with the entirety of my existence. And so it's something where like I honestly, and you know how like, have you ever heard of like a famous author who like, if they've had health problems they didn't know about, and then they drink too much or something, they'll like be working on a manuscript, and then like halfway through they'll pass away. Like in my mind, like I was under the impression that I would be gone before something like this would be published. So, yeah, Nietzsche. Like I mean, Hannah Arendt, Nietzsche, like so many of them. Um, so this means everything to me. Okay. And I appreciate all the support. I know that everyone can't afford it. It sucks because the book itself, and I want to just be transparent about pricing because why the fuck not? Like, so the book is in a paperback copy of it. They said it would cost me, like, they said I couldn't price point it less than $27 because of how expensive the printing would be. Because it was 111 pages in a Word document as I had it situated, but then I had to significantly shrink it down from an 8.5, an 11, piece of paper for each page down to a little under 6.5 by or 6 by 9. So it's safe to say the pages doubled. Um, and that costs, like a little bit more. So, and a little bit, it at least triples the cost, at least in comparison to what the cost is based off of the rate I decided to go with for Kindle publishing for my Kindle version. The Kindle version is a bit askew. It's more askew than I would like it to be. And I'm noticing typos, but honestly, I think a part of me when I was reading it was considering like doing the hyper controlling like perfectionist thing and going through and fixing them. But honestly, I think that I should just keep them as they are. Like whatever, who cares? Um, I think that people will still read it and understand what I said, and I think that it fits better and more realistically with the theme of the entire purpose of the memoir to have the imperfections stay there. To be honest, um, and I think that honestly, it will be like in a strange sense because of what I talked about, especially in the beginning of the chapter. Like I think that is a progress for me. So thank you. Thanks, Harley. Like I said, thanks for everyone hanging out. I think that's all. I think that's all I'm gonna read of the book. Maybe I'll skip over chapter two. I don't think everyone really gets like, and no one could. Like, I mean, I say that not under an impression that everyone goes around being able to look at someone and knowing what they've lived. But I really, really, really think that people don't have any idea what I've lived in my 20s. And I think that it's going to be shocking. Um, so just be aware of that. I say that I don't describe very much about it because to have described about it would have probably, I don't know, it would have taken away from the purpose of how I wanted the chapter to be understood, which was basically in a similar way to how I experienced it, right? So, like, as because of what I talked about in the first chapter, I want people to be introduced to the second chapter knowing the version of me that I just described, and the confusion and the reliance on others and the expectation for people to do the right thing and tell the truth, which obviously ended up being absolutely fucking atrocious in the world that exists. So, yeah, with that said, um, all the stats that I always repeat about the 9 out of 10 assigned female at birth autists that experience a life of sexual violence, um, despite being not diagnosed, the rates of substance abuse, like, that's what that chapter is about. It's called Requirement Politics. Requirement Politics? Full time drinker. um, and it just, I've tried, so I said this earlier, I think, before I started reading chapter one, or maybe even before reading the introduction, but basically, I have this other piece coming out. I originally wrote the draft of it in 2019, in fact, during a class in my PhD. It was in the English department, cross listed with women's studies, and it was called Raging Women Then and Now. And I wrote this article. Yeah, full time drinker, yeah. And I wrote this article called "Requirement Politics," and I coined a term in it that is really more of a, it's an entire concept, somewhat similar but different than how I've already referenced Patricia Hill Collins' Matrices of Domination, but more so like building off of the inspiration. But specifically, as anyone that's ever heard of Respectability Politics by Evelyn Higginbotham, I spun off of that term because obviously I don't experience, as someone assimilated into whiteness, I didn't experience the racialized expectations of respectability politics, but I have lived the respectability politics of being an undiagnosed autist. And at the time of writing that, I was deeply still suppressed as an autist. And then in this piece describing discriminations because of not knowing. Okay. So that piece has been put off for like, I submitted the first time because I modeled it after one of my faculty members who does poetic inquiry, which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's a academic method that combines academic research and poetry and personal narrative. Okay? So as soon as I heard that existed, because of, and you haven't heard this about me yet, but around the time, a couple years before I started my PhD, I talk about this, of course, in the memoir. I started finally writing poetry about all of those things. And this was shortly around this was a year before Me Too happened. Okay. So remember what the world was like, how dramatically different the world was then. I had already experienced the vast majority of the violence that I talk about in chapter two. By the time that Me Too had happened, it was at least 4 years before that. Okay. So I had incredibly suppressed that trauma. And also, I either did that or blamed myself because of the drinking, as most people that are millennials didn't know growing up. If you are blackout drunk, you cannot have consent, right? So obviously, knowing that, the legal definition of inability to consent while drinking to that extent, it being an act of violence, obviously, that has completely, among an entire, all of the violence, or not all of the violence, all the research about sexual violence that I did from writing my end of, it was like a convention ready paper I wrote at the end of my master's that went on to be my first book chapter in the first year of my PhD, about the hashtag MeToo campaign. Um, and yeah, that really just completely allowed me to reprocess all the violence that I lived. And it was wild because basically the time that I first wrote Requirement Politics was only a year or so after, maybe a couple years after that.
And then I submitted to the same journal the faculty member had their article in that I modeled it almost exactly after. And they told me they don't accept that method. And it didn't even, I didn't even realize at the time how that didn't make any fucking sense because of course they did. I modeled it off of a piece in which they'd already published by my faculty member using that exact same method. But they just really didn't want me to pour the tea about the violence that I lived because not only was I describing the violence that I lived in my early 20s, but there was a point in my master's, a year or starting the second year of my master's, where I worked as a campaign manager for the Democratic Party. And I absolutely, yeah, exactly. I absolutely tear as an insider who worked as a campaign manager for the Indiana House Democratic Caucus, I tear them a new hassle because of the sexual harassment I experienced while working there. And I'm pretty sure that because the co-editors of the journal, but who knows, they were probably just trying to protect me. And honestly, each time I've gotten reviews for this piece, because it started out, I wanted that piece to need no citations. Okay? And what I mean by that is after the years of studying just how rampant these violences are, and knowing that without a shadow of a doubt, I wanted the overwhelming research to now be treated as something that is commonly known. So I didn't want it to be cited. I didn't want it to need to be cited. Okay? I wrote it deliberately with significantly less citations than I usually would in my incredibly oversighted other research papers. Anyone that's ever seen me write any research paper, anyone that's ever perused any of my free copies of academic publications on my academia page knows I have usually about as many citations, as many pages of citations at the end of it as the actual article is itself, okay? So I am incredibly comprehensive because of my autistic pattern recognition and my need to show people that because I say things that are critical and not usually accepted by the dominant society, I need to show my receipts. And I know that. So, anyway, I didn't want to do that on principle for this paper because I wanted my lived experiences to speak for themselves. And I wanted the editors to do in apparently too radical act, which would be to acknowledge that my lived experiences stand on their own and speak for themselves, okay, about the way that the society works. And the editors, who many of them were PhD students, and odds are good, at the whim of a more established academic that is unwilling to let go of a neoliberal reformist kind of perspective, or again, that's probably me being a bit too harsh, and they were probably just trying to strengthen the piece and make sure that I wasn't going to be absolutely eaten alive by the time that it was published. Because obviously, in an academic article, no matter how much poetry and personal narrative is inside of it, you need to provide academic sources, or it's not a fucking academic article. And I get that. Like, I'm not naive. Anyway, this piece is finally coming out. It's finally being published after 4 years of trying to get it published. And it's there's been a free copy. The copy that is going to get published, in fact, in I think just maybe within the next 24 hours. I don't remember when they didn't give me the exact date that it was going to get published, but they said it's very soon, and that was about 2 weeks ago. So I'm presuming since a lot of academic journals will publish on the first of the month, that it might be tomorrow. And I reference in chapter 2 specifically the requirement politics piece. But because I know that knowledge should be freely accessible to the public, I've done everything I can to make sure that all of my publications, except for my 8 micro chapbooks of poetry, because it's just more of my trauma that I feel like people shouldn't just get for free. Because, there's a point at which I would like to be paid for doing labor. You know what I mean? Like the constant, like, tension of those dynamics in this horrifically inequitable society. Um, I basically, in that piece, have made sure to publish it on my academia for free. So when I make reference to it, I say that it's basically a companion piece to chapter 2, because I don't describe what I mean by requirement politics in chapter 2. I want the actions to speak for itself. And I want people to read that other piece because that's where I hash it out. That's where I hash out the actual fuller approach and purpose of what I think my critical media ecology can lend to specifically a late stage neoliberal, colonial founded, capitalist funded society that dehumanizes us all to the fullest extent of the law. Um, so, anyway, that's why it's called Requirement Politics, Full Time Drinker. um, but yeah, that reading that piece will definitely, for anyone who doesn't really get the fuller picture or you feel like you're missing some context, that's on purpose. And that's why. It's because I want you to also read this other piece that I've made freely accessible to you on my academia page. All you gotta do is make a free account, and it takes like a couple minutes. So, anyway, that's what we got. I am so excited. And I was telling this to someone who I told about, or, just another friend from TikTok. I was talking to them about this earlier. And I just really can't even begin to understand the level of lightness that I'm now carrying, after I think carrying everything that I disclose in this book with me my entire life. And for the most of my life, not thinking about it at all as a means of survival. So that is to say that, like, despite the risks, despite knowing I didn't deserve any of that shit, and none of us who resonate with it did, I know that it's worth it. I know that what I said is true. I've never not had sources. Okay, I refer, of course, to Dr. Nick Walker's work. Her three, like specifically the 2008 piece that she wrote, the her book Neuroqueer Heresies, where she coined the term, and then the definitions from her website. But I don't cite them in like typical APA fashion, which I'm used to. So that's weird. That was very weird for me. But I think that, again, because of the exact same reasons I just described for the requirement politics piece, I think that that's really important. I think that, and in times where I will cite statistics or something at the end, specifically in the very last chapter that's rather short, I say that if you are curious about where the sources are for the things that I'm saying, specifically for things like the 9 out of 10 assigned female at birth autists experiencing sexual violence, the 75 to 85% of autists being unemployed, despite it going up to 85% if you have a college degree, the research that shows that non-autistics and deeply ableist autistics alike discriminated against other autists, who, show stereotypically autistic characteristics. So whether that's through like the cringe humor bullshit phenomena, or, the things that I did when I was growing up, where I would bully other people that had, realistically, in hindsight, probably a lot of neurodivergent qualities that, because I wasn't allowed to embody myself for most of my life, I projected the resentment onto them. So this is to say that this is, I can't even imagine having done anything more fulfilling in my whole life. But I look forward to it because I'm not dead yet. And so now the system has to deal with me. As I often say, well, you didn't kill me, so now I'm your fucking problem. But for reals, thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate you all. I know that, and I forgot to mention my fucking tattoo in the book too, which is kind of ridiculous. But I make reference to it, if anyone noticed, the point where I say that I blush on my face and my chest, and I say it's my heart on my sleeve. What I mean is, and I can't believe I forgot this. When I was 18, in my very first year of college, and I talk about this in chapter 2 a little bit more, I was at Ball State first because I was going for social work, and my sister did that. I knew it was an accredited school, and I had no fucking idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I wanted to help people. So anyway, when I was there, I got my first piercing, which I also couldn't put in the book because it's in a place that was not appropriate for anyone to know about. And then shortly thereafter, I got this tattoo. So I got it when I was 18. I got it to indicate that I wear my heart in my sleeve, but I will lock you out. But it didn't work out that way, did it? I kept it. I told myself, and I explained it to my mom at the time, shortly after I got it. I said I got it to remind me to not be naive. That was the exact words I used. And wow, is that just the most ironic thing I could have possibly done? Being who I am and the way that my life hashed out the 8 years at least after that happened, if not a decade. Really, I mean, 12 years till I was 30 and realized exactly why I did that and the way that because of my hyper empathy and repression of just all autistic traits of mine, have done what I needed to do to survive. So anyway, the whole purpose of it, other than like I said at the beginning, is I really want people to recognize the interconnectedness of all the stats that are very, very new. Because academic research lags behind by at least 2 or 3 years by norm, okay? And so that's what makes, and that's why my work now of critical media ecology centers around users that are autistic in this mass realization moment during the environment where our lives have been already incredibly lonely. We're experiencing touch hunger. We're experiencing what's called the sex apocalypse, where people are allegedly having less sex than ever before. And every other like for-profit exploitative measure that exists. For all those reasons, I wanted people to recognize what it means about all of those things, knowing what we do know now about how common autism actually is. Because, as I say in basically every TikTok I possibly can, that changes everything, okay? And I don't think people really get how much that changes everything. Because with what we know about autists, that changes everything we've ever known about what used to be believed to be the universal human subject. That changes everything about thinking about what is normal, who is human, how anyone has reacted to anything, and what their motivations were, what is healthy, what is unhealthy, whether we can understand and look and know someone just by looking at them, the rates of comorbidities that autists experience that in a context of the environment put us at an incredibly vulnerable position where odds are good because people like me have never medically advocated for themselves in their whole goddamn life, despite having stereotypically POTS or EDS symptoms, or the millions of other fucking comorbidities at this point, basically, the lists that keep growing. They're so at risk to get a really debilitating thing, if not to die. And if they don't know that about themselves, after living a life like the one that I've lived, or anything in their own unique way, that is a fucking atrocity. And so I'm going to try to do everything I possibly can to share the connections that I see, because I know that people only know what they know. Everything becomes normal in repetition and everything is connected. Because what a colonial-founded, capitalist-funded society does, by definition, is it disconnects us from recognizing our ecological interdependences. It disconnects us from recognizing all of those things. And I'm by no means the first person that said this. This is just a new way. This mass neuroqueer self-realization moment that is matter-of-factly fucking happening, no matter how many non-autistic people downplay the reality of this monumental moment in history, it changes everything about the way that we know that, okay? And because of that dehumanization, because of the eugenics and fascism that is now rearing its ugly head once a fucking again, if we don't actually recognize how common autistics are, because we have an incredibly dehumanizing and myopic perspective on autism, and therefore we bastardize everything it means to be autistic, we're infantilized, we're sexualized, because we're dehumanized, every single way that objectifies us within a context that overwhelmingly, as I argued in my dissertation, it treats the human body as a machine, and we are expected to have less and less presence, less and less touch with our own emotions and feelings. We are especially vulnerable to that context, and that's why we are experiencing the rates of violence that we are. At least that's what I'm arguing. And I can't see anyone else contending that all isn't happening, because look around. At the end, I'm just like, okay, so now that we know all this shit, When do we fucking build mutual aid organizations, restructure the entire society, and do what we can to make sure that all the people that have been deliberately, historically, intentionally targeted, disenfranchised, and quite literally exploited, sickened, disabled, and killed to the fullest extent of the law? What are we going to do about that? So we can change all of that, because we now know all of this for the first time in human history, because we are more educated, more indebted, more propagandized, and more connected than ever before. And we need to do stuff about that. We owe it to ourselves, since we've all always deserved better. We owe it to ourselves, knowing all of this during the most connected time in human history. We owe it to ourselves to do something about that. And we very much can. And with everything I've learned about social change and rhetoric of agitation and control, one of the main, most effective motivators of whether or not you can do something is what they call the efficacy scale. It's, do you believe you can do it? Which is, it sounds so simple. It sounds like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's ridiculous. People just can do something because they think they can. Turns out that's what they say. that's what I talk about in my left book paper. Anyway, the thing is I mean, so John, you said, I need to get out of fintech and into some digital propaganda, and I don't think it's content. Or is it content or content? I don't know. But I mean, the difficulty rate is like, and I commented on this to a bigger creators post the other day when they had some sort of theory about propaganda. The main thing that I've learned about propaganda, well, two main things I've learned about propaganda, and I'm going to do my best not to launch into like a lecture here, because I got to get off and like drink water and be a human and stuff, is that basically the first thing is that propaganda has been given a bad rap. So like not all propaganda is bad, even though disproportionately it has. It doesn't need to be, kind of like advertising. In this society, it's bad. It doesn't need to be. If we were in a different society, we could technically do similar advertising tactics, and it wouldn't necessarily reinforce a colonial-founded, capitalist-funded hellhole like the one we currently exist in. Which is to say, that basically we can do things that we never thought possible, but because we keep looking backwards, we lose sight of that. And unfortunately, what a lot of propagandist like theories say, you are propaganda, fuck yeah. What a lot of famous propagandists have said, even though there's like an endless amount of propaganda theories, and I've by no means like memorized all of them, though I've tried alongside heavy drinking in my master's while I was learning about them, is that usually the people that believe they're least vulnerable to propaganda are in fact the most propagandized. Which I think, again, a different take on that could potentially be understood in regards to like a neurodiversity kind of stance. But there's a lot to say there. I mean, obviously, point is, we can't, nothing is objective, nothing is universalizable, meaning nothing applies to everyone. And we all deserve better. And that's just a fucking fact. All those things are just like, yeah, who's gonna say otherwise? So anyway, thanks for hanging out. Oh, content. Okay, yeah. I know. Okay, and that's a thing I didn't talk about extensively either. And I'll say this, and then I gotta, like I said, jump off. But the difficulty too, in that same regard, John, is like when I post stuff, like when I'm trying to get the word out about this memoir, the challenge of that, in part, or sharing anything about autistic content, is that obviously the words autism, and I do have a paragraph about this actually. The words autism and neurodivergent obviously aren't synonymous, but we all know, anyone that's been on autistic TikTok knows that that's been a long problem. Same with just like the problems of describing neurotype like a binary. That's problematic as well. It's too reductive, even though I get like the purpose of it, and people with good intentions have tried to like simplistically explain something that's very theoretical and abstract and complicated. But it's important that we don't erase all other forms of neurotype in equating, of course, neurodivergent with autism. But because of the world being so ableist, much in the same way that you're getting to with a different idea, John, is like, because the neurodivergent hashtag is so overused on TikTok, that is the single most effective hashtag to get my content out to people that I know are autistic. So that's really, again, a perfect example of really what I'm always getting at when I say that humans act as media in a society building process, but also all the biases are built into every media as features. And that's from people like Ruha Benjamin and Dr. Sarah Sharma and Lisa Nakamura and just like so many really badass like black and techno feminists and just like there's just so many badass like critical scholars out there doing really cool fucking work. So I'm by no means the person that came up with that phrase, the biases built into the system as features. That's usually Benjamin and Safia Noble are usually the two that are associated with that phrase. But it's hella important. So thanks. Anyway, y'all, thanks for hanging out again. Buy my book. Buy my book. It's right here. It is also, for anyone that doesn't know, it is on my Linktree. Hey, look at how skew this is. Let me fix this for you. Let me straighten your tie. So it's I'll read the back one more time, or the fictitious back, the summary that I wrote about it, and then we'll close. For anyone that wasn't here when I said it before, it's called I Have Been the Bad Guy, Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Age. It's funny because originally, because my dissertation at the end was called the end part, like the subtitle, I decided to change it at the last minute to Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Environment, because obviously anyone that studies algorithms knows that they are, what defines this age. But also, I think it's important just as much to not forget that we're still in an ongoing pandemic that is exploiting, sickening, disabling, and killing us all. So I'm using basically the algorithmic age and the algorithmic environment age post 2020. I'm using them basically synonymously. So on one hand, I accidentally didn't change the end of the title because I got so accustomed to just referring to the algorithmic age for my dissertation and writing it out that I forgot to change it on the actual title for the book. But in the cover, it says environment, and on the website itself, it says age. So, like I said, know that it is basically synonymous to me because it describes the exact same era, regardless of what we call it, after March 2020. And anyway, this is the write up for it one more time. And it goes like this. Have you ever been made to feel like the bad guy? Dr. Bird has too. In this brief memoir, they reveal secrets about their life that they have kept hidden for over 30 years regarding compulsory heterosexuality, repressed, unexplored queernesses, and the late in life realization that turns out they're hashtag actually autistic. Retold from their 33-year-old Dr. Bird's eye view, these extensively brave disclosures add one whole lifetime of flesh onto the US body politic. This timely manuscript illuminates, historicizes, and contextualizes the fucking fact that autism is not just a trend taking off on TikTok recently, but that there are massive neuroqueer self-realizations happening worldwide in the algorithmic environment. Environment plus virus equals environment. Oh, thank you, Kyle. Dr. Bird's unmasked writing voice puts the cut the shit into slice of life, providing deep and raw disclosures of lifelong confusion, gaslighting, and struggles with family dysfunction, friendship loss, vulnerability, intimacy, sexual violence, and substance abuse. After extensive sharing, it's time to grieve. They usher in a eulogy for their lifetimes that once were by diagnosing how foundational US ideas did and continue to dehumanize, sicken, disable, and deaden us. Then they preach to the global choir about the single most connected time in history. Dr. Bird has a lot more puns and trauma than answers in the end, but in the end, recommends some liberatory antibodies for moving forward, far less miserably. And yes, I framed, so for anyone that knows how antibodies is spelled, I deliberately spelled it that way because obviously anyone disabled is considered a kind of like body that is not one, or a body that isn't acceptable enough in comparison to non-disabled bodies. And so, yes, of course, that was a pun. Welcome to my endless love for puns. That just, the puns don't stop if you haven't noticed, especially if I'm talking about something that is particularly traumatizing. I think that it's very important and my duty to lighten the mood as the person who experienced it and is sharing it. Alongside, I hope y'all like the measures that I took with using the red exclamation points with the topic warnings, and then the yellow stars, the 7 rows to create the space so that if people can't read or shouldn't or just don't want to read the more graphic depictions of violence that I lived, they can skip past that. And then I did my best to still explain enough context so that they would get the relevance of my explaining it. And like as much context as is possible without knowing like what exactly happened. So anyway, yay. This is fucking cool. I'm excited to be alive right now for the first time in a while, despite the current state of the world. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you all around the internets. Do something nice for yourself, drink some water, get some rest. I know I'm hopefully going to sleep a very long time tonight because I was quite literally up all night, driven by nothing but just needing to do this. Just fucking needing it, okay? So I didn't sleep, and then I made sure to drop merch that says I have been the bad guy, so that's also in my merch store. Um, both the Kindle version of this book and the paperback are available. It says you'd get the paperback if you got the paperback version. You'd get it in like 48 hours, and I won't get my author copy until like August 12th or something. So there's a really good chance that if you buy the paperback copy of the book, you will in fact get my own book faster than me, which is hilarious, but also, you know, what a late stage capitalist nonsense world we live in. So anyway, like I said, I'm for sure gonna get some rest. But thanks again for hanging out. It means everything to me. If that hasn't been made clear. Drink some water, eat a nice snack, do something nice for yourself. We all deserve better, and I will see you around the internets.